The year is 1991. The red banner of the Soviet Union is lowered for the final time. After nearly 70 years, the powerful USSR, once feared and respected across the globe, collapses into history. In its place emerges a new nation. But instead of hope, there's dread. Russia is now a land without rules, a place where money rules, crime means power, and survival is a daily gamble. In just a few months, millions of citizens lose their savings, their jobs, even their homes. And in the shadows, a new elite emerges, men with gold watches, blacked-out Mercedes, and blood on their hands. This isn't just post-Soviet Russia. This is the wild 1990s. When the Soviet Union fell, it didn't just lose its government, it lost its economy, its identity, and its future. For decades, the state had controlled everything: food, jobs, even rent. But now, everything was up for grabs. Factories shut down. Workers stopped getting paid. Hyperinflation hit hard. Prices doubled, then tripled. A loaf of bread costs more in the evening than it had in the morning. Lifelong savings vanished overnight. And as ordinary Russians struggled to find food or fuel, a small group of men spotted an opportunity to become untouchable. In 1992, inflation in Russia hit 2,500%. By 1994, 70 million people lived below the poverty line. To kickstart capitalism, the Russian government came up with a daring idea: give every citizen a voucher, a tiny piece of paper that could be traded for shares in former state-owned companies, oil fields, steel plants, airlines, banks. The Soviet Empire was now for sale. The plan was meant to create a nation of shareholders, but most people had no clue what these vouchers were really worth. They sold them for groceries, vodka, or a few rubles in cash. Meanwhile, a few cunning and ruthless men started buying them up by the thousands. This wasn't just business, it was daylight theft. Entire billion-dollar industries were snatched up for the price of a used car. By 1996, a small handful of men, later known as oligarchs, controlled more wealth than entire Soviet ministries ever had. Here's a striking fact. One man bought 40% of a major oil company for just $100,000. In just a few years, Russia had gone from communism to a gangster-style capitalism, where rules didn't exist, and neither did the middle class. With no real government oversight, no functional police force, and billions of rubles ripe for the taking. Russia in the 1990s became the perfect breeding ground for organized crime. If you opened a business, you didn't just pay taxes, you paid for protection. If you didn't, your windows were smashed, your family threatened, or worse, you'd vanish without a trace. Dozens of mafia groups ruled the streets, each with its own soldiers, assassins, and politicians in their pockets. Moscow turned into a battleground. Drive-by shootings, bombings, public assassinations, contract killings became so common. They even had a nickname. Between 1992 and 1999, over 3,000 contract killings were recorded in Russia. Many were never solved. Even the oligarchs had to choose sides. Some hired private armies, others struck deals with mob bosses. In many cities, the line between businessmen and criminals simply faded away. Russia wasn't just being looted, it was being conquered, not by foreign powers, but by men with gold chains, leather jackets, and blood on their hands. While the oligarchs grew richer and the mafias gained power, the average Russian was simply trying to survive. Hospitals had no medicine. Teachers went unpaid for months. Entire neighborhoods depended on black markets just to find bread or nappies. Pensions disappeared overnight. Families shared one apartment, sometimes without heat or hot water. In the winter, people burned furniture to keep warm. In the summer, they sold everything they owned just to get food. Alcoholism soared, and so did suicide rates. Millions of men simply vanished from the workforce or from life itself. And yet, something unusual happened. Amid the destruction, a new kind of freedom appeared. People started their own businesses, played rock music in underground bars, and finally spoke their minds without fear of the KGB. It was a messy, raw, painful freedom, but it was real. For the first time, people could dream of something greater, even if they had no clue how to reach it. But those dreams often ended in blood, because behind the scenes, Russia was being divided up by gangs ruthless, heavily armed, and terrifyingly organized. At the top of the underworld sat the Solntsevskaya Bratva, based in Moscow, named after the Solntsevo district. They operated like a corporation, laundering cash through banks, buying up restaurants and casinos, and partnering with global criminal networks from Italy to Israel. Their alleged boss, Sergei Mikhailov, known as Mikas, built a billion-dollar empire. He was seen in luxury resorts, mingling with politicians and oligarchs, protected by a web of bribes and fear. By the late 90s, Solntsevskaya had operations in 12 countries and over 9,000 members. In St. Petersburg, the Tambov gang, led by Vladimir Kumarin, took over fuel distribution, ports, and even parts of city government. They were notorious for their political connections, particularly during the early careers of certain city officials. In 2007, Kumarin was arrested and later convicted for racketeering and organizing murders. Investigators accused the Tambov gang of killing rivals and extorting fuel companies. Kumarin was known as the night governor of St. Petersburg, unlike the more business-minded Russian mobs. Chechen gangs inspired fear through sheer brutality. Known for kidnappings, bombings, and contract killings, they were dreaded even by other mafia groups. In 1996, journalist Dmitry Koledov, who investigated corruption in Chechen mafia links in the army, was killed by a suitcase bomb placed in his newsroom. The case remains unsolved. The Chechen mafia was tied to hostage-taking during both Chechen wars. The most dangerous part, these gangs weren't separate from the state. They were bound through bribes, alliances, and influence. Some gangsters even ran for public office, and won. By the late 90s, it became impossible to tell where the mafia ended and the government began. Russia was being ruled by both, often in the same room, signing the same deals, protected by the same guns. By the end of the 1990s, the gunfire had faded, but the damage stayed. Russia was breathing, but barely. Her cities were filled with empty factories, broken families, and graves with no names. Heroin swept through the streets like a plague. Teenagers sold themselves for scraps, not because they wanted to, but because there was no other choice. Stairwells became shooting galleries. Schools became ghost towns. Hope became currency, and most people couldn't afford it anymore. Freedom meant nothing when your stomach was empty. Democracy was just another promise that led nowhere. People didn't want slogans anymore. They wanted stability. They wanted to stop waking up in fear. So when a quiet man from the KGB stepped forward, promising to restore pride, to punish the corrupt, to never go back to the chaos of the 90s, they didn't just listen, they obeyed. Because after a decade ruled by criminals and cowards, Russia was ready for a new kind of strong,